Moses is told by God to tell Israel to observe the Sabbath day. Literally rest and don't do no work. And he tells them why. Join me as we talk about observance of the Sabbath. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Sunday School lesson as taught by Rodney Jones. I would like to take the time to thank all of you for your comments that you've been given. It's really been uplifting me. I thank you for your thumbs up. Those of you that can and will, please give me a thumbs up if you are enjoying these videos. Please subscribe at the bottom and hit the bell symbol on the left so that you will be notified as we upload the videos weekly. I thank you for the time that you've taken to view my videos, and I encourage you to share if possible. Bless you. Two key characters here. I'm going to move directly into it. First character we have is the main character, all capital, L-O-R-D. I say this in many of my videos, but just to catch up. In this lesson, God is spelled all caps, capital L-O-R-D. And he really is the covenant God. He is the I am that I am God that's speaking in this lesson. He is the all-sufficient God, or the self-sufficient, or the self-existent God. In other words, this is the God that exists because he exists. He told Moses later, he says, or earlier, I am that I am. And I am literally means I exist because I exist. So that's character number one, the Lord. He is the maker. He is the creator. He's the founder. He's the one that brought Israel out of bondage to where they are today. Matter of fact, while I'm there, this lesson takes place at Mount Sinai. This is where we are. We're in Mount Sinai. And God called Moses to Mount Sinai to give him these tablets. And you will see at the end of this lesson that God gives him those tablets. Character number two would be Moses himself. Moses is a very unique man. He is the man that God spoke to when he spoke to Abraham and said that in the fourth generation, I will bring Israel out with great substance. Moses is the actual man that God was referring to, the fourth generation. Later, we'll talk about that in another video, how Moses is the fourth generation coming from the loins of Abraham. And Moses was a very unique man. He was a man that the Bible said he had to have been good looking, because the Bible illustrates that Moses was made good looking. Pharaoh sought out to kill all of the men 2 years and under. But because of the looks of Moses, the Bible said Pharaoh's daughter saw him and pulled him in and kept him. Here's years later, Moses would deliver Israel out of Egypt. They are at Mount Sinai, and Moses is now on the mountain. Then we have the children of Israel. Very strange, stiff-necked, hard-necked people, a people of disobedience. Yet, these are the children of God. They came from the loins of Jacob. Jacob had 4 wives, 2 wives and their handmaids he married. And from them he had 12 sons and 1 daughter. And from those 12 sons, 10 of those sons became tribes and 2 of his grandsons. Because Joseph had 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and they would be the other 2 tribes of Israel. Israel is the firstborn son of God. Everybody else falls in line. We're in the 31st chapter of the book of Exodus. Exodus meaning exit out. Israel is already out of Egypt. They are out of the land of bondage from the hands of Pharaoh. God has already delivered them, and now they're in the wilderness. Exodus 31, verses 12 through 18. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily, my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord, that doth sanctify you. Ye shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. Every one that defileth it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest. Very interesting. Holy to the Lord. Whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generation, for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed, which means he breathed. And he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of the communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of God. And may the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word. I have 9 key words for you. Are you ready? Here we go. Verily, keep, Sabbath, sign, holy, sanctify, work, Sabbath, observe. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, here in our lesson, it opens up with God speaking to Moses. Moses was the spokesman between God and Israel. Israel would not be able to deal with God talking to them. One time Israel said that, oh, we're ready to talk to God, and God began to speak through lightning and thundering and clappings, and the mountains were shaking and smoke was everywhere, and Israel got scared and said to Moses, nah, I think you better talk to God, because they were not ready. Everybody is not ready to speak to God like you think you are. And God is not some tool that you would handle. And God does not just open up and talk to everybody on a daily basis for naught or for no reason. Old folks say for naught, for no reason. So God, he chose to talk with Moses, to talk to the children of Israel. Moses is the spokesman that God would use to communicate all of his words to Israel. So God speaks to Moses and says unto him, speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily. Now, verily would be our first key word. Now you would think, why the word verily? Verily is a particle, meaning only, surely. Its emphatic use is translated as indeed or surely. It's interesting because the word literally means exclusively keep my Sabbath. When he says verily, he's saying exclusively keep my Sabbath. This Hebrew word sets the Lord's Sabbath from all other Sabbaths. When Israel keeps the Lord's Sabbath, it shows they reverence him, number one. It shows their obedience to him, number two. And it shows and demonstrates his covenant with them, number three. And then number four, it also serves as a reminder that they belong to him. So when they observe this, it serves as a reminder that they belong to God. And it reminds them that he brought them out. that last phrase we're going to deal with later on. So he says verily, which means strictly or exclusively that they were to keep his Sabbath, which means don't keep nobody else's Sabbath. Also, when they would keep his Sabbath, it shows their reverence to him, and God would separate them for the sole purpose of keeping his Sabbath. So when the neighboring people would see them keep the Sabbath, they would recognize that these people belong to God because they keep his Sabbath. There's something about the way the children of Israel handled themselves, but there's something about the way the children of God should handle ourselves, well, the world would know that's one of the saints by the way they keep reverence of God or whatever. Now, while I'm on this Sabbath, for some reason we kind of got confused. Now, the Christian church does not celebrate the Sabbath because actually the Sabbath is Saturday. But because our Lord Jesus Christ rose on the first day of the week, we call that the Lord's Day. That's why we worship on a Sunday. But I'm going to put a side note in here. As a minister and as a deacon and as an ordained elder, we don't get rest on Sundays. And I'm going to be honest with you all. That ain't right. We're going to talk about that if we're going to observe the Sabbath. Now, this is not for us. This is for Israel to observe the Sabbath, and I'll show you why. So that first word would be verily, verily. Speak unto the children of Israel and say, verily my Sabbaths you shall keep. Now, another word is the word keep. The word keep is another key word. It means to watch over or to guard, to care for something or to give attention to. And what the Lord is saying to Moses is to tell Israel to give attention to my Sabbath, reverence my Sabbath, keep focus on my Sabbath. Because every time that they reverence the Sabbath of God, they reverence God. I'll say that again. When they reverence the Sabbath of God, they reverence God because they reverence the fact that God told them to keep the Sabbath. When they choose not to reverence the Sabbath, they choose not to reverence God. So he says keep, which means to protect, to give attention to. Then he says keep it because it is a sign. Now, a lot of these words is close by each other. It is a sign. Remember, a sign is a signal. It is a mark, or it's something to be identified by or identified with. So whenever you saw someone keep the Sabbath, you know that they were one of the children of Israel. So he said it would be a sign. You shall keep it, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. Now, he uses the word sanctify. The word sanctify is a key word, and it means to separate. It means to make holy. What did God do with Israel in terms of sanctify? He sanctified them from the world. He pulled them out of Egypt, because Egypt denotes the world. It denotes sin. It denotes bondage. And God pulled them out of sin, out of bondage, out of slavery. He separated them from them. And then he separated them to himself. So the word sanctify means to separate. It means to make holy. And so God says, I made you a holy people, or I made you a holy nation unto myself. So it says, you shall keep the Sabbath, therefore. Now, the word Sabbath, now if you jump back up to verse 13, there's an S on this Sabbath. That doesn't mean, now some may say he's referring to all of the other Sabbaths. There are feasts and Sabbaths that took place. I don't believe he's talking about those other feasts, because he keeps talking about 6 days or 7 days. So I don't think it's these other feasts and Sabbaths feasts that they have, or the 49 weeks Sabbath and anything like that. I think a literal 6th day and the 7th day rest. The word Sabbath means 7th day. It means, in the Hebrew, the word Sabbath means to cease from exertion. To cease from exertion. So he says to keep this Sabbath, which means 7th day, and which literally means to cease from exertion. You shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. Now, this word holy is a very powerful word. As it is used here, to me, is strange or unique. The word holy indicates something consecrated and set aside for sacred use only. It usually refers to a building or a tabernacle or a tent. It's usually this tabernacle, this temple, this tent is consecrated, holy, and dedicated for the purpose of worship. So that's what the word holy would mean. But here, he takes the word holy and uses it not for a person like the priest or the high priest Aaron, who would be holy, and he didn't use it for a tabernacle or for the tent, the dwelling place, but he said the actual observance of this would be holy, which means this is a consecrated thing that I'm asking you to do, and is dedicated for the Lord. So he calls it holy. I'll read that again. Verse 14, ye shall keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy unto you. It is sacred unto you. It is consecrated unto you. It is set apart and marked as only for the usage of God for you, which means that they could not reverence or use the Sabbath day of rest for any other thing other than for the Lord, which means whenever they would observe it, their focus would be God and nothing else. All right. Now he says, everyone that defileth it shall be put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. Now, why would he kill somebody for not observing a day? It's quite simple. Because God set it up as a holy day. And when you defile something that God made, you defile God. When you defile a law of God, you defile God. When you defile a covenant or a commandment of God, or a precept or a law of God, you defile God, because God set it up, and he set it up for his purpose. And whenever we don't do what God says for us to do, we broke his law. And so he says they would be worthy of death, and that soul would be cut off. Now he uses the word work in verse 14. He says, for whosoever doeth any work. Now, this is key. The word work is occupation, business, or something made. It means human labor. Occupation, business, something made, human work. It literally means work, even to support your family. A key thing is God told Israel that they were only to gather this manna for 6 days. And on the 6th day, they were to gather enough for the 7th day, and that they wouldn't have to worry, and that they were not supposed to gather up on the 7th day. Because the thing is faith in God. What happens is we remove the hand of God from working for us or in our behalf when we try to outdo and make everything work our own way. So we don't give God enough room to operate or to work. God says, you rest on the 7th day and I'll take care of the rest. That's faith, and that's the love of God. That's something that for some reason we just fail to realize. So the word work. Now I'm going to show you something. When you go to Exodus 35 and 3, Exodus 35 and 3, it was working when a person was kindling a fire. To kindle a fire literally means to strike the match or to make the fire or flame so that you can cook and eat. That was illegal. That was in Exodus 35 and 3 because it was considered as work. When you get to Numbers 15, 32 and 36, there was a man who was gathering some sticks or gathering some wood. Israel found him, brought him to Moses. Moses locked him up, and God says that man shall die. Why? Because he was working. Even though it seems simple to man, it's not simple to God. His rule was still broken. That man would have been better off to stay at home in obedience to God, and God would have blessed him. That's a sidebar right there. Obedience to God is better than you trying to make a way for even your own family. Because God knows. It says, my heavenly Father or your heavenly Father knows what things you have before you even ask him for. Why is it that we have to ask him for it? Some things you don't have to ask God for. He's obligated as being your Father to provide some things for you. Okay, we're going back. Now, you can do good. And I'm going to read this. Matthew 12. Matthew the 12th chapter and the 12th verse. Matthew 12 and 12 is a pretty good one because this is when Jesus' time. This is when Jesus was here. Matthew 12 and 12 says, how much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. They tried to trick Jesus up in dealing with keeping the Sabbath. There were some things that you could do as long as it was not considered as work. It was lawful to do good on the Sabbath. It's lawful to heal on the Sabbath. It's lawful if your friend fell to help him up and dust him off. It was lawful to do those things. It was just not lawful for you to work, to do no servile work on the Sabbath. And when you get to Mark 2 and 27, Jesus says that the Sabbath was made for man and not the man for the Sabbath. Then he gets to verse 15. He says, 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh, it is the Sabbath of rest. Now that looks like a double word, Sabbath of rest, which is another key word, because the word Sabbath, meaning 7 days, means rest. And the word rest means rest or Sabbath. So what he says is it should be a Sabbath of rest. In other words, rest of rest, Sabbath of rest, which means it should be a day of complete rest. God does not want Israel to work at all. He wanted them to be at ease, minds to be at ease, body to be at ease, to kick back and relax. It's a day of observance. When you observe the Lord, what happens is your body gets relaxed and you become thankful to the Lord for the things that he has done for you. And God was serious about this because he said if you don't do it, then you're gonna have to die. So he was real serious about it, and he called it a Sabbath of rest, a rest of rest, or a complete rest is what he was saying. It says, holy to the Lord, whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Any work. Any work, he was going to be put to death. Verse 17 says, it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. Now, this is important because he didn't say it is a sign for me and the world. He didn't say this is a sign for me and the church. But he said this is a sign for me and the children of Israel forever. Israel was very unique to God, and Israel was the people that God chose. Israel is the chosen people, We are the engrafted people. We got in by grace. Israel gets in by choice and by election. They are the election of God. So there's some things that God did just because they are his firstborn children. So he says, it is a sign, it is a sign, it is a mark, it is a symbol, it is a token between me and the children of Israel forever. Now, he goes into the reasons why he's establishing this for them. Now, this is not the first time mentioned, because there was in the Ten Commandments, and the Lord mentioned the Sabbath previously to them. So this is not the first time. Israel already knew about the Sabbath. But he says it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. Now, I have to let you know that that term forever means as long as this covenant, this Old Testament covenant exists. When Christ came and died, he initiated the New Testament or the New Covenant, which shifts them from that previous covenant of practicing certain things to where Christ is now over it all. And Jesus says the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. But he says here, it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days, this is the reason why. In 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. God was refreshed. He made everything in 6 days. There was nothing else made after the 6 days. That means even the women was made before the seventh day. No one was made, and nothing was made after the 6th day. And on the 7th day, God rested. That tells us something. That we were not told by God to observe the Sabbath. But rest is very important. It's so important that God rested and made the day that he rested holy. And it's important to our bodies that we take a rest. Because what happens is we overdo it and we mess ourselves up. Then go to verse 18. It says, and he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of God. If you look in Exodus, the 24th chapter, in the 12th verse, that's when God called Moses up to Mount Sinai to give him the tablets and the tables. And what was going on is God would speak to Moses about Israel, and then Moses would go down and tell the children of Israel what God said, and Israel would say, we agree. And Moses would go back up and talk to God, and God would give Moses more, and then Moses would go back down with Israel, and Moses would go back and forth to communicate between God and the people about the covenant. And so Israel ultimately said, we agree to the terms of the covenant. And then God wrote the terms of the covenant down with the finger of God, and it is now set in stone. Literally set in stone. And then Moses brings the law that God just gave him, the 10 commandments or the Decalogue, the law, which I believe the 4th commandment included the Sabbath. Now, there's another word, observe, because it's Sabbath observance or observance of the Sabbath. And that's our last key word. Observe means to keep, to practice, to take notice of, or to celebrate. Now, I want to say something. To me, it's unique. Circumcision was a sign of an individual participating in the covenant of God. But observance of the Sabbath is a sign of the entire nation of Israel participating in the covenant. Say that again. Circumcision is an individual sign. Every man shall be circumcised, which makes him part of the covenant. But observance of the Sabbath is a sign for Israel, the children of Israel, that they have entered into the covenant. Now, there's 2 reasons why. Two reasons why God instituted this for Israel. When you go to Exodus 31 and 17, which is in our lesson, he says, it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. All right? Forever. He says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. So number one, the first reason why God instituted this day of rest for Israel is because God made the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and then God rested from all of his creation. And then the second reason why, and I want to go to this in Deuteronomy, the 5th chapter, this is the second reason why God made the Sabbath for Israel to follow. When you get to Deuteronomy, the 5th chapter, verses 12, he says, keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. Watch this. Thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thine ox, nor thine ass, nor any of thy cattle, nor any stranger that is within thy gates, that thy manservant and thy maidservant may rest as well as thou. That means everybody in your house gets a chance to rest. Here's the reason why. Verse 15. And remember, now as you're taking this rest, God says in verse 15, remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord thy brought thee out thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. So God says to them two reasons why he instituted the Sabbath of rest. Number one was in the lesson, Exodus 31 and 17, because God rested on the seventh day and made it holy. And then number two was Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15, is because God brought them out of slavery. Because Israel was in bondage. They were in slavery. They was in Egypt for 430 years, and they was inflicting pain on them, beating them, making them and causing them to plow and to make bricks and to make all this kind of working. And that happened for years, and there was no rest for them. And God brought them out with a mighty outstretched hand. And God said, because I brought you out, I want you to remember that you were slaves. Remember that you were servants in the land of Egypt, and there was no rest for you. He says, I pulled you out. I sanctified you, I separated you, and gave you this, I'm about to give you this land that's flowing with milk and honey. That was not in there, but he was going to do it. He says, I pulled you out from the hands of Pharaoh. I pulled you out, and I brought you through the Red Sea, and I brought you through the wilderness. You understand what I'm saying. Kind of got a little carried away. But that's what God says. I brought you out of slavery. And I instituted this for those two things. And he says, all I want you to do is keep it. Observe it. Because when you observe it, and when you're relaxing and when you're resting, you reverence God by resting. Somebody needs to know that God likes it when his people rest. Stop overdoing it and killing yourself. So keeping the Sabbath was a sign of the covenant between Israel and God. Here's the thing. God told Moses, speak unto the children of Israel and tell them, in 6 days you may work, do everything that you have to do, but on the seventh day you shall not work, you shall rest, because it is a day holy unto you, and it is a day holy unto the Lord. And he said, the Sabbath day of rest is a sign. It is a sign, like the rainbow is a sign. It is a sign, like circumcision was a sign. It is a sign or a token. It is an agreement or that there is a covenant between God and the children of Israel. And he says that you are not supposed to do any work because God pulled you out of slavery and because God rested on the seventh day. Therefore, he says for them to rest on the seventh day. And he says, you shall observe it. And anybody that does not rest on the seventh day of the children of Israel, God says, shall die because you have violated my laws. You have polluted my laws by working. God wants to take care of them. All right, that's it. That's the end of our lesson. I'm not going to go any further. I want to thank you all for watching and for tuning in. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell below, and if you can, give me a thumbs up if you are enjoying these lessons, and leave me a brief remark or comment. I'm really thankful for those of you who are taking time to view, and for those of you who are leaving me comments. It has really been inspiring me to continue to do what I'm doing. Pray my strength in the Lord. And remember the Sunday school motto: a child saved is a soul saved plus a life. Amen.